Welcome to another episode of Cozy, Charming, Crazy Real Estate, where we talk about everything real estate. Today we're going to talk about wholesale real estate transactions. Some people believe, well, wholesale, it must mean you're bundling a bunch of properties and selling them all together. In reality, wholesale transactions usually involve just a single property. So we're going to define wholesale real estate transactions. We're going to talk about the basic steps that are followed, and we're going to talk about how to recognize a wholesale offer so that if you are a seller of a property and you've been presented with a wholesale offer, you'll be able to recognize it, and you'll be able to decide, is a wholesale transaction good for you and your situation or not. So let's get started. First thing, what is wholesaling? Well, wholesaling is the purchasing of a property and simultaneously selling it to an investor before escrow closes. And yes, that means that the wholesaler is making a contract between the wholesaler and the buyer or the seller to buy that particular property for a specific price. But before escrow closes, that wholesaler intends to resell the rights to buy that property to an investor or a second buyer, which we're going to call an investor. Now, the typical wholesale process is pretty simple, often in 4 steps. First is the wholesaler wants to purchase a property, normally a distressed property, and as soon as they get it into escrow, they want to start selling it. So they're going to market that property to investors. In the 3rd step, they actually close a deal with an investor, and the investor assumes the right to purchase that property. And in the 4th step, escrow actually closes, and they call it a simultaneous close because in reality, you're closing the original purchase contract and the second contract between the wholesaler and the investor. Now, just keep in mind that processes can vary. Wholesaling can be different based on where the property is located, the type of property, current market conditions, and also different wholesalers work in different ways. What we're going to do is talk about a bare bones general concepts of wholesaling, but you may see the actual process be a little different on your transaction if you are a seller and you've been contacted by a wholesaler. Now, step 1, finding sellers. What is a wholesaler looking for? They're looking for sellers who need cash fast. They're looking for properties typically that are distressed, both financially, such as perhaps in foreclosure or close to it, and properties that are maybe in bad condition that would take a lot of money to get them repaired enough to qualify for conventional financing. But the seller doesn't have that money, so they're looking for a deal that does not require that. And they're also looking, and unfortunately this is true, not always, but quite often, they're looking for sellers who don't understand conventional sales, because quite often you can get a better deal through a conventional sale than you can through a wholesaler, but we'll talk about that again in a minute. So typically, how do the wholesalers market? They are going to do direct mail quite often to NODs and NOFs, that is notice of default, notice of foreclosure. These are notices that are publicly recorded by the lender that notifies the owner of the property that they are in default on their mortgage, they're behind on their payments, or that they have exceeded the period in which they can catch up, and the mortgage company is now going to foreclose. Those are public record, and the wholesaler typically is going to keep an eye on such filings at the recorder's office, and they're going to put those property owners at the top of their list when they do direct mail. They might also blanket mail a neighborhood where foreclosures are common, where distressed properties are common, where they've seen a lot of distressed sales. You might also see billboard ads, and you might hear radio ads that say something akin to so-and-so company, so-and-so person is buying homes cash. Give us 5 minutes on the phone and we'll give you a fair offer. Those are sometimes just cash investors, but they are also quite often wholesalers that are going to follow the process we're going to get into a little bit more here. Step 2, once a wholesaler finds a seller, they're going to make that seller an offer for their property. Now, the key components of such an offer is going to be a very below market value price. More on that in a minute. We're going to have an escrow that is long enough for them to find another buyer. Now, typically when you get a cash offer on a property, the cash buyer wants to close in anywhere from 7, 10, maybe 15 days. In a wholesale offer, it's going to escrow. They're going to ask for a longer escrow period. Now, another thing you'll see in a wholesale offer is their deposit is never at risk. For example, in a conventional sale, you will see that there's usually a 30-day escrow and there's a 15-day contingency period up front during which the buyer can make inspections and look for the best financing they can get. And if they can't get the kind of financing they want, if the property has more problems than they're willing to take on, usually within 15 days, if they cancel escrow, they certainly have a right to, and they get their deposit back. That is not the case with a wholesale transaction. More on that in a minute. Now, how to spot a wholesale offer. First off, short validity, long escrow, long contingency. So, short validity means the wholesaler wants you to make a decision on their offer very quickly. Maybe because they don't want you to consider other offers, but certainly they want to get on with it. They want you to make they're going to make their offer valid maybe anywhere from 6 hours. I've seen them 1 hour. They can be 24 hours, 3 days, but normally a very short period. They're going to ask for a long escrow because they want enough time to go out and find an investor to take over that contract that they have entered into. So they want enough time that they can typically market the property and get the best deal they can with that second buyer, the investor. As I mentioned just a minute ago, they want a long contingency period because they want to be able to actually cancel if it's a 30-day escrow on day 30 if they did not find another buyer, an investor, to assume that contract. Wholesalers do not take title to property. Their whole business is based on finding another buyer, the investor, to take over ownership of the property at the end of escrow. So they want a long contingency to be able to do it. If they can't find a buyer, they want to be able to pull out and get their deposit back even on day 30. As we discussed, they are usually looking at distressed properties, so they will not ask for a lot of inspections, not appraisal. They're going to be making a very below market offer, so the appraisal is not all that important. Now, a couple things that you'll see on a wholesaler contract that are very typical to wholesale. One is it's assignable, and you might see who is the buyer, or on the line where the buyer is identified. It might be Joe Wholesaler, whatever the wholesaler's name is, or assigns, and that means that the wholesaler has the right to assign that contract to another buyer, again an investor. They might also put a notice on here just so that everyone is clear. An investor notice that says something like or similar to, this offer is made by a real estate investor for the purpose of making a profit. That way they are indeed being honest. They're telling you what they're up to, and therefore you can expect that offer, when it all comes back down to money, that offer is going to be below market value. So step 3, they get you to agree, if you're a seller, to sell you their house at that below market value. And now they're going to go out and find an investor to take over the contract. The first thing they're going to do is look at a list that they typically have developed themselves, a list of investors, and each investor, they'll know what type of property that investor typically likes to buy, and they'll put out perhaps a mass email describing the deal and see if anyone on their list wants to make an offer. They might even, if their list doesn't work out quick, they might circulate that offer through a number of networks. And even in some situations, they might advertise it as for sale by owner. Now, do they own the property? No, but they do own the right to buy it. Are they real estate agents? Most of the time, no. They are real estate investors. Wholesaler may be licensed, may not be licensed. But sometimes they might go out on the open market trying to find somebody who's willing to sell or buy at that price that they want to get. So let's talk about very quickly talk about the margins that everyone wants to achieve in the sale of this property. Starting at market value 100%, we know that our investor does not want to pay 100% for that market. They are 100% of market value for that property. Therefore, they're going to probably want 20% off, some percentage off, based upon their assessment of how much money they're going to have to put into that property to resell it themselves or to rent it out after it's fixed up. So they're going to need some space in the margin. Now, the wholesaler, he needs some space between what he is obligated to pay the seller and what the investor has agreed to pay him, and that is the wholesaler's margin. In my example here, I say that, well, the wholesaler wants to make a profit of about 20%. He's willing to pay the seller maybe 40% of the market value, and the investor is willing to pay 60%. So that difference of 20% is going to be the wholesaler's profit. Now that can vary. All these numbers can vary. And when you get to the actual deal, those percentages will be replaced with actual numbers. But this kind of lets us know that everyone is expecting a discount percentage, and the seller is going to be selling way below market value by the time the investor and the wholesaler take their margins. So when we get to step 4, what's going on? Well, we're going to close escrow. Now, the only person or entity in this process who puts money into escrow is going to be the investor. And the escrow officer is going to look at that money. They're going to look at the 2 contracts in front of them, and they're going to say, okay, that original purchase contract is now, according to the terms of the investor contract, that original purchase contract is assigned to the investor. So they're going to know what to do. The first thing they're going to do, and this is as would happen in a standard sale, they're going to pay off the mortgage if one exists. They're going to pay any liens, and they're going to pay any taxes due. Then they're going to pay the closing costs, and those closing costs may be totally borne by the investor. They might be paid by the seller. They might be paid by the wholesaler. Regardless, that allocation will be made. The closing costs will be paid. Then the original purchase price will be paid, and minus any closing costs that the seller is obligated to pay, will be a check will be written to the original seller for the amount agreed to, minus closing costs, and then the margin between what the investor has agreed to pay and what is paid to the seller, that red margin that we saw in the previous slide, that will be paid to the wholesaler. That is their profit. When everyone has been paid, then the escrow and title companies record that deed, and the investor takes title. Again, as I mentioned previously, the wholesaler actually never takes title to the property. They never become the technical owner. They only acquire the rights to resell it. So what are the pros and cons of wholesaling? Well, the pro is it's a cash offer, and a lot of people need cash fast. Hopefully, the wholesaler's offer gets that cash to a desperate seller within the time frame that the seller needs it. The pro of the condition of the property is also very important. It means the seller does not have to invest anything in the property. They can sell it as it is. And there are very few contingencies. even though we know that the biggest contingency, the one that can kill the deal, is the ability of the wholesaler to find a second buyer or an investor to assume his contract to buy the property. So what are the cons? Well, the biggest con, as we already talked about, is that the property is being sold well below market. And if we had the time and we're sellers, we might put that property on the open market. We wouldn't know if we can get more unless we put it on the market. But a con is that normally we know that the price is going to be well below market value. Now, as we just mentioned also, that sale could fall apart on day 30 or the final day of escrow if the wholesaler is unable to find an investor to take over the original contract. Now, you could also say that one of the other cons is the loss of marketing time. In other words, if you are a seller, you need cash now, and you're hoping this wholesale deal is going to get you through, let's say, in 30 days, and it does fall out, let's say, on day 29, day 30, and you find yourself with still owning the property and no money, you've lost some marketing time. Now you may be a bit desperate. Maybe. One of the things that a good agent will tell you is that during this time you should also be soliciting other offers as backup offers. Now sometimes sellers will say, well, I'm willing to accept your offer if this other one falls out. And certainly you can do that. Most of the time you say, I will consider your offer if my wholesale offer falls out. But one of the things that is a risk, is a con, is that you will lose marketing time if you don't accept backup offers. So that is the process, the risks, the pros and the cons to a wholesale real estate transaction. And I hope that if you have one presented to you, you find yourself in the need to consider one, you will consider this information and make a good decision based on knowing how wholesale transactions work. And again, the risks, pros, and cons. If you like this video, I hope you will hit like. If you want to see more cozy, charming, crazy real estate, please subscribe. If you have questions or comments, please leave them below. And please, until we're back again, stay healthy, stay happy, and we will see you on the next cozy, charming, crazy real estate. Take care.